You're gonna hang here with the crows and watch the earth as it dies. You're gonna hang there and have a little chat with your God about what you killed. Your God. It's your God. Your God that shames this earth.
Hey guys, I'm coming at you with another movie review, and I'm joined once again by my friend William Burns.
Hello, everyone.
Now, do you prefer Professor or Dr. Burns?
I prefer just call me William. That's fine.
Alright, that's fine, Bill. Later on in this video, you'll hear from my friend Chris Espianl and my friend Cara. The movie we want to review is the 1991 Canadian folk horror drama film Clearcut. Now, Clearcut was directed by... How do you pronounce it again? It's...
I think it is Ryszard Bugajski.
Okay, Ryszard Bugajski, I know I'm butchering his name, who's actually a Polish director. It's a Canadian film, but the director was from Poland, and he actually has a really fascinating backstory, which I'll get into in a little bit. The film was written by Rob Forsyth and based on the 1987 novel A Dreamlike Mind by M.T. Kelly. Clearcut tells the story of a white lawyer named Peter McGuire, who is representing a group of First Nations people whose land is being infringed upon by a paper mill that is clear-cutting on their land. After losing their case, McGuire meets this mysterious man named Arthur, who asks him, "What would you like to do next?" Peter jokingly says that he'll like to kidnap and torture the mill manager. Arthur takes him up on this, and things only escalate from there, ultimately leading to Arthur kidnapping both Peter and the mill manager and taking them out in the woods to physically and psychologically torture them by subjecting them to the same kinds of tortures and humiliations that his people have dealt with for centuries, and show them that they're both guilty of exploiting his people. The film stars Ron Leah as Peter McGuire, Michael Hogan as Bud Ricketts, who is the manager of the paper mill, Floyd Red Crow Westerman as Wilf, who is an elder of the native tribe that we see in the film, and Graham Greene, who absolutely steals the movie as Arthur. I just want to give fair warning that there will be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen this movie, you might want to before watching the rest of our video, but for the love of God, please watch this movie. If you have the money, it was recently released on this absolutely beautiful Blu-ray set from Severin Films called All the Haunts Be Ours, which is a box set of folk horror films. So, what do you think of Clearcut?
I was blown away by it. To be honest, I had never even heard of it. I got the aforementioned folk horror box set, and I was going through each disc, just watching each movie. Clearcut, it sounded very interesting, but I knew nothing about it going into it. And after watching it, I was just floored. It really sort of got into my mind in terms of what it must be like to be an Indigenous person, to go through all the tragedies, to go through all the traumas, to have to be constantly reminded of those things in your daily life. Like I said, I was absolutely floored by it. I thought that the performances were awesome. The script is amazing. The direction is like spot on. I think it became actually my favorite film in the whole box set.
You told me about this when I got the box set. I asked you, hey, what do you recommend from this? And you just said Clearcut is awesome. I ended up watching Clearcut, and yeah, I fucking love the shit out of this movie. I've actually watched it 6 times since I've gotten the box set. It's one of those movies that I kind of make a point to show different friends of mine who are into the same movies that I am, and everybody I've shown it to has really been receptive to it. What I find so interesting about this film is this came out in 1991, yet it feels like it could come out today. Like, the themes of the film are so relevant to today, if not even more relevant. I mean, it touches on all these, like, not just the themes of, like, native rights, but there's also a lot of environmental and ecological themes in the film.
It's a couple of degrees hotter where they clear-cut the area. Roughs up the air.
Looks like the moon on a bad day.
Looks like money to me.
Isn't that sad? Isn't that a sad commentary, though? That this movie is, 30 years old, over 30 years old, and we're still talking about these things and nothing has changed. I mean, that's a really sad commentary on the nature of like you said, on native rights, environmentalism, colonialism, righting the wrongs of the past.
When I was watching this movie, I kept thinking of, what was that, Standing Rock? I just kept thinking of that, and let's say you and me own property in the woods somewhere, and then an oil company or a paper mill was drilling or clear-cutting on our land, we would have a legitimate legal case against them. Then why is it that these native peoples, in both the movie and in real life, don't seem to have the same legal rights that you and me would have? Like, is it literally just pure racism?
Not much of a warrior, are you? Hey! Get down! Stop it! I represent these people. My name is Peter McGuire. I'm a lawyer from Toronto, and Wolf Red Wing is a good friend of mine.
Then tell them to back off. Tell them they lost.
I'll have your badge.
It's the legal system's on the side of the oppressors, right? Who created the legal system? It didn't just drop out of the sky. The colonizers created it, right? The ruling elite created it. So of course it's going to favor them, you know? These poor native people don't have a chance in hell of winning any of these things because the game's already stacked against them right from the beginning.
And we both recognize the irony that we're both au faits reviewing this movie. The film is also kind of about the failures of pacifism. I'm not saying this is necessarily a mindset I want to endorse necessarily, because I don't like violence in real life, but like in the movie, the character of Peter, he's very much a pacifist, and he keeps telling these native peoples, no violence, no violence, violence will accomplish nothing. And yet you see in the movie, these people are being brutalized by the police. Like, peaceful protesting is getting them nowhere.
Here he comes.
Violence will accomplish nothing. Nothing, you understand?
No, just who are you lying to?
I'm not saying I'm endorsing violence, because I'm not. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but in this movie, we're seeing how pacifism can fail sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been one of the key questions of societal or political change, right? Revolution versus evolution. Should it be violent revolution, right? Or should it be peaceful evolution? And in the film, obviously, Arthur represents the violent revolution and Peter represents the pacifist evolution. But I think and that's a question that's been asked, for hundreds of years. But I think the greater and the more important question here is, what right does the colonizer have to tell the colonized how they should react to these things? Like, what right does Peter have to tell Arthur not to be mad, not to be violent, not to be angry, And I think that's actually, to me, the bigger point of this, that the colonizer always thinks that they know better than the colonized, right? And again, it could be, and in the film, you have two colonizers, right? You have Peter, who is the lawyer, who, in his mind thinks he's on the side of the native people, and he's been accepted by them, and he's doing this, this heroic work for them, saving them. And then you have Bud. Yeah, you have Bud, who, is actually in some ways more honest about things than Peter is. But it does not try to put up this facade that he's trying to help the native people, or that he's trying to, do the right thing for them. Like, he's kind of direct in the fact that he wants to make money, and if he's got to trample on these people, he's going to do it.
Not only that, but the man's clearly a racist.
Yes, absolutely, right. But again, Peter's a racist too. But Peter's not going to admit that, right? Peter's not going to come out and say that. In his mind, he thinks that he is, he has this sort of, he's a liberal and he understands these people and he empathizes with them. And if the movie shows that no colonizer can ever empathize with the colonized, it can't happen because of the powers, any number of things, but especially because of the unequal power relationship between them, right? And Arthur shows that to him, right? Again, I think Bud probably already knew that in some ways, but the real realization in the film is Peter's realization. That's the real realization in the film.
Enough's enough. Cut the rest.
You don't know nothing. I listen to you. You think I give a fuck what you say? Your words, your papers, your limp white dick? You think You think you know what I think. You think you know me.
Yeah, the movie has a lot to say about the whole white savior complex. Movies that typically fall into the white savior category are movies that focus on issues affecting people of color or like native peoples, but they're usually told from the point of view of a white protagonist who comes in to try to help a certain group of people. And while I think a lot of these kinds of films are good intentioned for the most part, again, they can be kind of condescending to the very people that they're trying to portray in the film. Movies that kind of fall into this category would be like To Kill a Mockingbird, even though I think that's a great movie, but again, like that does kind of fall into that category. Even Green Mile, even though I love Stephen King, again, that could also be kind of considered a white savior movie, or movies like Dangerous Minds. And I think this movie really does kind of take the piss out of those kinds of films.
Absolutely. Actually, it reminds me very much of a book. It was a book that came out, I believe, in the late 50s, early 60s. It's called The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, who was he was from Martinique, so he's French Martinique, and he wrote this whole book, and he actually became a psychologist, and he went over to Algeria during the battle of when the Algerians were fighting against the French to sort of to get the French colonizers out of Algeria. And what he realized, he worked with a lot of Algerians who had this psychological breakdown, and what he realized is that it wasn't just biological, and it wasn't only physiological, but it was also political. That when you take people's voice away from them, when you take their honor away from them, when you take everything away from them, right, and you strip them down to nothing, and you treat them like the wretched of the earth, right, you have to expect that there's going to be some retribution. There's going to be some wish for violence. There's going to be some pathology of violence. Right? And again, I think Fanon would have loved this film. I think Fanon would have said, yes, this is exactly what he's talking about here, right? The idea that if you're the white oppressor and you're going to tell the Native American, oppressed that they have no right to be mad, they have no right to be violent, they have no right to things, right, is just another form of colonization. It's a psychological colonization, right? It's an existential colonization of the people. And again, I think this film really sort of speaks to that, right? That the white savior, that the white protector, is something we have to totally dismantle, right? Because it does way more harm than it does good.
Think I'm cool. You'll forget about the trees and the kids born stupid and the judges who laughed. You'll forget. Arthur will still be cruel.
Stop it.
Stop me.
Is this your revenge?
You know that soldiers used to play catch with the breasted Navajo women? And they were slippery and hard to hang on to. And the soldiers, they'd all laugh. Arthur's cruel, and I forget why. Well, it's time for them to pay.
How much?
More than this.
This is enough.
Enough? This is nothing. This is only one man's leg.
And again, we both recognize the irony that we're both basically colonizers talking about this
absolutely,
movie.
But again, but the point is that we have to talk about these things, right? We have to acknowledge that these things happened, right? And that's what happens. So much of this stuff has been pushed aside or pushed down, right? Because for any number of reasons why, oppressors don't want to talk about this, right? But how is healing going to happen until we talk about these things and we recognize them?
But something I do really love about this movie is there is a certain degree of moral ambiguity to it, where while I definitely think the film is on the side of the Native Americans that we see in the film, and I think it's on the side of Arthur's motivations, there is this degree of ambiguity on whether or not we should be 100% rooting for Arthur, because Arthur is technically the antagonist of the film, and while I think his motivations, I think the film wants us to be on the side of his motivations, it does leave it up to interpretation whether he is legitimately justified in what he's doing to Peter and Bud, or if he's going too far. And while Bud Ricketts does start off the film as an antagonist, when you see the torture that he endures, you can't help but to empathize with him a little bit, despite what a deplorable person he actually is. And while Peter is arguably the protagonist of the film, as we already pointed out, Peter is also guilty of exploiting these people in his own way.
Well, why does it have to be that binary? Why can't Arthur be both antagonist and protagonist. There's been some discussion about how Arthur represents a trickster, right? The trickster sort of motif in Native American, indigenous peoples' mythology and their culture. And that's important, right? The trickster is not only important just for like metaphysical, religious, kind of, spiritual aspects, but it also has a very important societal role, right? Because when you have something like tribalism, right? You have usually a lot of indigenous peoples have tribalism, right? Where the family is extended out into the tribe. Well, almost like the whole tribe is the family, right? And then usually in tribalism, there's this look to have sort of cohesion, right? And everybody has there's not really a place for individualism, right? People have to come together. There's got to have that solidarity. On the one hand, that's a good thing, right? Everybody's protected, everybody, right? But on the other side, is when you have that kind of that communalism, okay? A lot of times you get like groupthink, right? Where everybody starts thinking the same. There's a sort of a hubris or an arrogance, an exceptionalism that, like, when you don't have other people who are individuals who are pushing back against this. So that's why the trickster is so important to tribal communities, right? Because that's what the trickster does, right? The trickster pushes back. The trickster is a deceiver. The trickster tricks. The trickster pushes. The trickster is the contrarian, right? And there's an important societal value to that, right? Because you don't want to get into a groupthink. You don't want everybody thinking the same. You don't want that conformity, right? And of course, that's bred in a tribal kind of way, right? And that's why. So the trickster is a positive, but it's a positive through a negative. I don't know that kind of makes sense, right? That he is an asset to the community by the fact that he is a negation. You understand what I mean? Because he's contrary, that's what makes him an asset. If he just went along with everybody else, then what would be the points? Right? It would just have to be one more person that agrees. The fact that he disagrees and pushes against these things and makes you think, right? Pushes you into an uncomfortable position and makes you critically think, right? That's the value. And that's what I see Arthur. So Arthur is a protagonist through being an antagonist.
After watching the film a few times, I think there are definite supernatural elements to the film. Like,
I can see that.
Okay, you could look at Arthur in two ways. You could either look at him as just a Native American person who's just fed up with how his people are being treated and he decides to take action. Or, and I think the film definitely implies this, you could look at Arthur as being some kind of spirit of vengeance in human form, or even a spirit of the earth. And you have a scene where Wilf is telling Peter the story of Wasekajak, which is a figure from, I think, Cree folklore, who I think is actually a pretty important figure in Cree folklore. And again, I'm showing my ignorance here because I really know nothing about the actual legend of Wasekajak, but like you said, Wasekajak is supposed to be like a trickster spirit, and the film very much implies that Arthur might be a manifestation of Wasekajak. At the same time, it also implies that there's something supernatural going on with Wilf. So could Wilf possibly be Wasekajak and is just pulling Arthur's strings?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that shows my bias, right? I'm much more interested in politics than I am in spirituality. So I guess that's what I focused on more in the film. But I could see that reading. I think that reading definitely, And I guess with Native Americans, you can't separate the politics from the spirituality.
Yeah. But at the same time, you could also look at that reading as being somewhat problematic because it does kind of play into the whole sort of mystical Indian trope that you see in a lot of movies. So there is that to consider.
Sure.
I would like to tell you a story.
Story.
About Wasekajak,
What?
the deceiver. Wasekajak was told to teach man how to live in the right way, how to get along with the creatures and the forest. But Wasekajak made quarrels. He stained the ground with blood. And they told him no more, but he didn't listen.
What's the point, Wilf, huh? Is there a point?
Wasekajak had to be stopped. There was too much blood. He had become a victim of his own stupid ways. He had lost himself. He had to be stopped.
I remember when I told you about this theory, you didn't like it, and I'm not saying this is my theory, but a theory I've come across about the film is that Arthur wasn't even real and was kind of like a reflection of Peter's own psyche and his own anger. Because Wilf even says to Peter at one point, "You dreamed anger, and your anger was real." kind of implying that Arthur might not even be real, and somehow Peter is doing all this to Bud Ricketts. What contradicts that is the fact that there are moments where Bud talks to Arthur. I know you weren't really a fan of that theory.
No, not at all, because it takes the voice away from the indigenous peoples, right? Arthur is, right, again, it's trying to give another voice to the colonizer. Why I think that totally flies in the face of what of the ideology of the film.
Now, while I don't necessarily agree with the theory that Peter and Arthur were one and the same, what does give the theory some credence is the fact that in the movie, Peter is a pushover, and you see Arthur doing the things that Peter can't, but maybe wants to. And then you also have, in the movie, you have this little girl named Polly, who Peter meets in the beginning, like right before he sees the protests, and then we see her at the end. And if you notice, Polly is wearing the same necklace or pendant that Arthur is wearing. Now, you could take that in several different ways. I watched this movie with a friend of mine who interpreted Polly as Arthur's daughter. Or you could look at it as maybe Polly is another manifestation of Wasekajak. Like, maybe they're both aspects of the same being. Again, if you want to go into the whole supernatural interpretation of the film.
I took it as just hope for the future. That this, like that, that these stories, these customs, the trauma, the struggle was not going to die with Arthur's generation, right? That this little girl is going to listen to this, is going to hear these stories, and is going to keep fighting. That's what I took it as, right? But wearing, almost like it's the cultural kind of like, passing over or something to, a cultural sort of gift that is being given to the younger generation from the older generation. So that's why I actually took it as a very hopeful ending.
Now, this might seem like a weird comparison, but I actually think there are a lot of comparisons you can make between this movie and Bernard Rose's Candyman, in the sense that Arthur in this film is very much a manifestation of all the traumas and injustices that were done to Native American people throughout human history, or like throughout the history of colonization. Just like in Candyman, Candyman is a representation of all the traumas and injustices that were done to African Americans throughout history. And both films also feature protagonists who go into these communities with maybe good intentions, but also kind of selfish intentions as well. And the protagonists of both movies end up kind of paying for, like, their white savior complex, for lack of a better term.
Sure, absolutely. I think you're spot on. And the movies are about past traumas that will not heal until we face up to them, until we admit them, until we bring them out to the light, right? That's what these movies are, I think, are both about. And that's what, to me, that unites them, right? They're about past historical traumas, right? Past historical sort of tragedies that people still are not owning up to, right? That sort of the colonizer is not saying, yes, I did it, I'm guilty, we did these things, we owe these people something. Right, we're still not saying that, or at least the conversations are being, there are more conversations about that now than they were, let's say, when these movies came out, which was interesting. They both came out in the '90s, at least the original Candyman and Clearcut. But it's still not there yet. So I think, but I absolutely think that we're still haunted by what happened in the past, these past tragedies, and until we admit to them, until we own up to them, we exercise them through. Love, understanding, compassion, rather than violence, or rather than hiding them or repressing them. Maybe something good could come out of this.
Another movie that this reminded me a little bit of is the Peter Weir film, The Last Wave.
I love that movie. That's another movie that I think is just absolutely brilliant. I love that movie, right? Another movie about, I think, though, it's a little bit more, the thing that's different about this is that, because it's about lawyers, right? There's both movies have lawyers as one of the main characters, and them trying to understand indigenous peoples, right? We have Richard Chamberlain's character trying to understand the Aborigine tribes of Australia. The thing, though, that's different about it for me with the Peter Weir film, which I think is brilliant. This shows you that Peter Weir, what an amazing filmmaker is. Okay, he not only has Richard Chamberlain understand that he's a member of the colonized and what the Europeans have done to the Aborigine people, but what he also shows is how Richard Chamberlain himself has been colonized, right? That he was like a mystical, right? He had these dreams and everything, and how Christianity was shoved down his throat, So again, there's different levels of colonization that I think in The Last Wave, it talks about, like, there's historical colonization, but also personal colonization. you know? And it would have been interesting to see that in Clearcut, but we really don't get that deep into Peter.
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean? Like, we don't see how he himself might have been colonized by any number of ideologies. Because, again, I think that in Clearcut is the story of Arthur. In Last Wave, it's the story of Richard Chamberlain's character. I forgot his name, you know? So I think that might be the difference. But yeah, I mean, they're both absolutely brilliant films.
I don't know if you would consider Last Wave a horror film, but I think Last Wave, like this movie, is that perfect amalgamation of folk horror and ecological horror.
Sure. I would actually think that Last Wave is more of a folk horror film than Clearcut is, you know? I think and not to say that Clearcut isn't a folk horror film, but I actually think that the weight of that film actually falls more on the political side. Like, you know what I mean? It's more about politics than it is about some of the folkloric aspects of it. Like I said, I think one of the things that Arthur shows in the film is that for indigenous people, folklore and politics are interweaved. That they're things that they cannot be, and that's where I really think the folk horror comes out of that movie, right? Is that you can't extract the folklore from the political aspects of the indigenous people. Where with something like Last Wave, right? That's what the movie's about, right? Is how the Europeans cannot understand that. They see everything as being separate, right? Law is over here, politics is over here, civilization, right? And that's one of the things that Richard Chamberlain's character in Last Wave has to understand, right? He's got to come to understand is how folklore imbues all these things, right? And that maybe law isn't as objective as we think it is.
So before we continue on, here is my friend Chris Espianl giving his thoughts on Clearcut.
It's a very beautiful movie as far as the cinematography, the location, the atmosphere. I really identify with the main character and how he feels, but at the same time, I do understand the hatred and the distrust that the indigenous people within that area have against the corporate white man, as they put it, rightly so. And it has a lot of things we can learn from it and a moral ground. So I like that at the same time. And I like the hidden spiritual, even supernatural nature behind it. It's both comedic, violent, it's atmospheric, it's witty, it's wicked. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's insane. There's a point where one of the characters you come across, his name is Arthur. He's one of the natives in the area in Canada. I'm not sure where. It was a wild ride for sure. It's definitely a wild ride. You know, the ritual that he goes through when he cuts his finger off, Arthur. And there's this very, very interesting... so this is one character, I believe, that Peter interacts with in the very beginning. Sort of like there's kind of like a small little history. There's a native girl there. You don't ever see her again. But cut towards the later half of the movie, Peter is kind of saving the business pig, the white pig, that... is trying to destroy and mold over so many indigenous people's homes. And Arthur is trying to make an example. Not exactly sure what was his intent. I'm sure he intended to kill him. Nevertheless, Peter and Arthur, they go through a moral ground, kind of fighting one another, trying to convince one to stop because they're heading towards a dark path, but, you know what I mean? Arthur dies, or he kills himself, or did he? Because later on in the movie, he appears as the little girl, or is he the little girl? So, is Arthur a spirit? There's a lot of things there that you can pick up, and it's beautiful. It's like in the undertones of the beauty of it. You see the lakes, the blue skies, the trees. It's an amazing movie. It's a really amazing movie to soak in. You get everything. History, conflict, drama, story, humor, violence, and a little bit of lore. You got a little bit of everything in that movie.
So what did you think of, technically there are 3 principal characters, but you do have the 4th main character in Wilf. But what do you think of the principal characters in the film?
Well, I thought they were all extremely well-rounded. I think it would have been easy just to make, like, you know, Bud to be the evil corporate capitalist and to make Peter the good, you know, well-meaning liberal lawyer and Arthur as the sage, all-knowing Native American. But they don't do that. There's layers to all these characters, you know. And to me, actually, the most interesting character is Peter. I think he's the most interesting character. Because at the beginning, you see this guy and you think, wow, he's really helping these people. He's a lawyer. He's donating his time, you know. But in the film, what you really realize is, in his own way, maybe not as overtly as, let's say, Bud is, he is exploiting these people, you know, and he has reaped the benefits of colonization, right? He's a lawyer, you know, and the legal system is a product of colonization. And, you know, he can alleviate his guilt in that way in his conscience and not have to think that he's a bad guy.
You could turn off the mill and you don't.
What, you mean just switch it off like a light bulb or something?
Arthur, it's not that simple.
That mill is the lifeblood of this community. It feeds 1,000 people and their families. If I switch it off, where are they going to go?
Arthur, don't bother talking to him. He doesn't want to understand.
Shut up! I am talking to Arthur here about what Arthur wants to talk about. So, Arthur, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the trees.
We're planting new ones.
You cut more than you plant.
No, we don't. Okay. You stop using paper products, and we'll stop cutting your trees.
You commit crimes, admit it.
And you reap the benefits, just admit it.
Again, that's something I love about the film, is there are nuances in the film where, yeah, Bud, he's a piece of shit. He's a racist, definitely like the worst example of a capitalist. At the same time, not all of his points are necessarily wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, he does make some decent points, and also, I'm not gonna lie, there are points in this movie where Bud is fucking hilarious.
You're starting to look like one of them. You like that?
Oh, hey, I'm an Indian. Oh, look at me, Mom. I got an identity, too, hey?
He's going to kill you.
Yes, absolutely, you know. But again, just to go back to Peter, one of the things that struck me right away in the film, and this is why I think I immediately, I loved it so much, right, is that with Peter, you know, you have this idea that because he befriends the Native Americans, because he works with them, he thinks he knows their plight. I think that he, in his mind, thinks, well, I'm one of them, you know? And in the film, what's so brilliant about the film is Arthur shows that you'll never be one of us, you know? And by bringing them out there and making them suffer in this way, in a small, minute aspect, right, he's making them understand what it means to be Native American, to suffer. And that's what I thought was so brilliant about the movie. You know what I mean? Is that and the thing that's brilliant about it is Arthur does it to both of them. He doesn't just do it to the heartless capitalist. He does it to the liberal, you know, the liberal apologist as well. And he shows that neither of you understand. Neither of you do. And the only way to understand is to be one of the colonized. And until you can be one of those things, you'll never understand us. So, and that's what I thought was so brilliant about the movie.
Well, we do gotta talk about how fucking amazing Graham Greene is in this movie.
I almost wish that this movie was an American film, because I would have loved to have seen Graham Greene nominated for an Academy Award. I think that's how good his performance is, right? Was he nominated for Dances with Wolves?
I don't know if he was or not.
Maybe supporting actor or something. I thought something, because I remember at the time, he was just killing it in the early 90s in terms of acting. You know what I mean? He had this film, he had Dances with Wolves, I forget there's another film he did too, and like his acting is just like off the charts. You know, he's able to do not only with the way he reads lines, you know, but just his facial expressions. You know what I mean? There's times that he's very stoic, you know, and you don't know what's going on in his mind. There are other times where he has a tremendous amount of expression on his face. You know, he's just what a great actor. Just like I said, a spot on actor. So talk about how brilliant the script is. You know what I mean? Like this, I think the script is amazing. Like it hits on for only an hour, however long the movie is, hour and a half or whatever. It hits on so many important things, and it doesn't do it in a way that is trite or, you know what I mean? Like it's not shallow. You know what I mean? Like it hits on all these important things, but it gets deep into them. Like these are deep things to think about and to talk about and discuss and to ponder. You know. So again, I just think the script was brilliant as well.
So the director of this film, Bugajski. Again, I know I'm butchering his last name. He was a Polish filmmaker who actually, in the early 80s, because obviously back then Poland was part of the Soviet Union, and he was given money by the then communist government of Poland to make a communist propaganda film. He took that money and made an anti-communist film called Interrogation, which basically got him put on like sort of a hit list, and he had to flee to Canada. I don't know, given the themes of the film, if it's ironic that the movie is literally directed by a white European.
Well, again, but the Poles were not colonizers. If anything, the Poles were colonized by Germany and by Russia. So in some ways, maybe he does have a good insight into this. Maybe not exactly because he's not an indigenous person of, North America. But the Poles were not colonizers. They did not colonize other countries. They weren't imperialists. They were the victims of Russia, the Soviet Union, and obviously Nazi Germany, So maybe he did have some insights into that, into sort of what it means to be an oppressed person, what it means to sort of, to have your culture taken away from you, or to have this other ideology imposed on you, like Nazism or communism, And it kind of reminds me, too, about the first Candyman movie, about how it's interesting that Bernard Rose, who I believe was English, right? Was English? Mm-hmm. Him coming over to make a movie about American racism, But maybe sometimes you need that outsider. You need somebody from outside the immediate situation to see different things that we don't. Maybe people, if you're a member of the oppressed or the oppressor, maybe you're so close to it that you might lose some of the larger kind of issues because you're so invested in it. Maybe you need somebody from outside sometimes to come in and to give a different kind of perspective on things. So I guess that's the way I see it. Historical horrors, right, that people have to relive, right? Nobody, there seems to be no, answer to these horrors. There's no sort of, corrective maybe to these horrors. That maybe the oppressor owes those correctives to the oppressed. I think one of the points of the film is that Arthur is going to show these people, going to show Bud, and is going to show Peter what horror really is. What does it mean to really live in fear and to live, as oppressed people? The horrors of that. He maybe just it only takes a couple of days or whatever like that. He kind of concentrates it, I guess, over those few days. But I think that's one of the points he's trying to show them. What is it like to live through not just one life, but generations of people have to deal with this, the horror and the tragedy and the trauma, and it doesn't go away. It just seems like people forget about it, and these become forgotten people. I mean, look at even the United States. Like, do people even talk about Native Americans on reservations anymore? Do they even talk about the plight of these people, the alcoholism, the suicide rates, the unemployment? Does anybody even care? I mean, it's funny. We hear a lot of talk now about reparations for African American slaves. What about the reparations for the Native Americans? That was a genocide. That was like, what I mean? It's like, and then they were just shuffled off, At least over time, African Americans became, assimilated in some ways into our society, But what about the Native Americans? Does anybody even care anymore? That's why I think this film is still so important, and I'm so happy that Severin put it on this box. Because honestly, if it was on this box, I don't think I would have even seen it. I wouldn't have even known about it. Again, it just shows like how important these things are to be kept in the public eye and to be kept talking about. I hear I'm being a teacher. I hear students all the time, but like, what do we have to keep talking about slavery? What do we have to keep talking about these things? And I'm like, until they end. When there's no more slavery in the world, when there's no more oppression, when there's no more of these things, then maybe we can stop talking about them. But until then, we should maybe discuss them more.
What are you gonna do?
I'm gonna kill him.
No.
I'll scalp him. I could scalp him and be a real Injun. I should be a real Injun, shouldn't I? Shouldn't I?
Now I want to cut to a discussion I had with my friend Cara on this movie. What did you think of Clearcut?
It was outstanding. It really was. It was so ahead of its time, and unfortunately, still talking about it. Environmental themes of indigenous folks living off of the land and having people come and excavate the land without permission. Like, that's all stuff we're still talking about today. So it was very chilling how it's still relevant, but it was a very respectful, interesting portrayal. There wasn't a lot of gore, but when there was bloody stuff, there was intense.
Yeah, that's something you mentioned to me, is like how the film's actually pretty tame, but when it does get violent, it gets fucking violent. Like when Bud Ricketts' leg is being skinned is one of the most brutal things I've ever seen in a movie.
It's very rough, especially for back then with their effects and everything. It was
because it looks real. Like it looks fucking real.
Yeah, and you don't need all that over-the-top gore to get the point across. The point wasn't the gore. The point was building up to these intense scenarios. I started to sympathize with Peter a little more, but then I start to see, unfortunately, how his words are kind of hollow. Like he's playing into the system because it's almost like it gives you no choice, but he's trying to be peaceful and it's not doing anything, and it comes off very kind of hollow. Arthur, in contrast, is more aggravated, more violent, and it's understandable. It's just understandable. He's playing into the jokes he hears about his race and his people all the time. Like I wrote it down, like playing into I'm gonna scalp him and be a real Injun. Like that line stuck with me because Injun was the way people back then were like Indians, Injuns. Like it's a weird word, but he's playing into all the things that his people are known for. He doesn't believe it. He's using it as a tongue-in-cheek, like a scathing, like he gets all of that, now he's throwing it back.
Like, I think the two biggest tropes of Native people in movies are like, they're either portrayed as like the wise, mystical sage,
of course,
which the character of Wilf, the elder in the tribe, is kind of that.
Sure.
And then the other unfortunate trope or stereotype is the savage. And unfortunately, Arthur kind of, I don't want to say he becomes that, but he plays into that to make this point to both Peter and Ricketts.
Right, exactly. I don't sympathize for Bud, but I sympathized with Peter a little bit, but even so, how are we supposed to, who are we to judge how somebody that's been persecuted can react to their land or being stolen or stereotypes? Like, we can't. It's not our experience. So this movie was enlightening with that. You also brought up the spiritual aspect, which I saw in nature, but then you were talking about a trickster, and you want to elaborate?
Well, in the movie, and I mentioned this with Bill, you have that scene where Wilf is telling Peter the story of Wasekajak, which is this like trickster spirit from Cree folklore. The implication that I think you're supposed to get is that Arthur is Wasekajak, that he's actually some kind of spirit of the earth or spirit of vengeance. Like, implication is that Arthur's not actually human. I don't know if you agree with that interpretation or not.
At first I didn't see it because I didn't know the Wasekajak mythos, but now that you brought it up beforehand, I definitely do see that he could be, more prone to violence for that reason, or there's that element of supernatural because he is so connected. There was a line I also wrote down where one of the guys that earlier in the movie says, it's like these Indians know something we don't, and that's implying that they do have a mystic wisdom that is tied to the earth. So he is not only a human, but he's got this spirit that nobody else understands, this connection to the earth Arthur has.
In the beginning, when Peter's asking Wilf, hey, can you stop this?
Yeah.
Wilf just says, Arthur has come to do this. He says it as if this is something that Wilf can't stop. Like, this is something that needs to happen.
Right. It's the story. And he came back and spilled too much blood. I felt like such a colonizer, like, with this mindset, but I didn't fully agree with, because I could see Arthur's, like, anger and stuff, like, the resentment towards these people in power that just keep doing what they do, but also, he did take it too far on his end, where he was just exacting revenge, and when I saw him filleting the skin, I'm like, how is this ever going to bring Ricketts to Arthur's side? And that was the point. It wasn't ever going to bring it to his side. It was just about Arthur taking on all the burden of his culture and the pain and putting that out on one person because somebody has to, somebody has to pay. That can't repeat. They repeated that like 4 times. Somebody has to pay. He saw what people did. He kept quoting like what soldiers did to his people and like leaning into the stereotypes. And some people would see that as, okay, we get it, you're Indian. But it's like, no, this means a lot to some people. And it's like, when that's all they're seen as, he's well aware of these stereotypes. He's playing into it. And he's so bitter. Because I don't understand, but like, it's understandable that he's so bitter. All this shit has happened, but then violence begets more violence, and it just builds more. And unfortunately, we're following Peter through his whole moral dilemma with it. His dynamic with Arthur was one of the, like, it was the main bread and butter of the movie, so to speak. They were always at odds with their moral philosophies. And
Yeah.
Peter had, I guess, good intentions, trying to study these indigenous folks and, like, trying to help them. But there was only so much he could do. There's only so much he'd let himself do. He didn't want to step on the toes of the law, but then he's trying to help the natives and observe them, but he's losing the case. And so he was almost sympathetic, but I know that you're with Arthur the whole time. I can definitely see why, because it's so unfair. Who are we to say, like, violence is not the answer when you're having your territory and your land, you know, encroached on? Like, of course you'd be fighting.
But then that's also the whole argument of that line between terrorist and freedom fighter, you know, and, like, I don't know if you want to get into that.
Moral dilemma. No, absolutely. Yeah. Like, Bill was saying before, why is there binary? Like, there's definitely, like, Arthur was not completely the bad guy. Peter was not completely the bad guy. And I saw that in the film, hence why I felt a little bad for Peter. Like, he's trying to be peaceful. Like, why do we have to resort to violence? But then Arthur, you know, had had enough in his own personal experience, but Peter didn't have to worry about violence before, so he's being a pacifist.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrorist and freedom fighter. That's a very good, it's a very good moral question right there.
So we have all the implications that Arthur is Wasekajak in the film. I don't know if you read Neil Gaiman's American Gods or have seen the show American Gods, but I believe Wasekajak is a character in both the book and the show. Like,
oh, that's cool.
And guess who plays Wasekajak in the show American Gods? Graham Greene, who plays Arthur in this movie.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah.
That's sick. Okay, that actor has been around in these circles playing certain roles, and just, that's so fitting. That is such a perfect casting choice. Like, good. Like, I love that. It's almost like, yeah, it came full circle 30 years later. That show I've seen a bit of, and it's very good.
So yeah, guys, that was my review of 1991's Clearcut, featuring myself, Bill, Chris Espianl, and Cara. I hope you enjoyed this review, and once again, if you haven't seen this movie, please check it out. You're doing yourself a massive disservice if you don't see this movie, and bye.
Do you see?
No.
Well, you bloody well hang here until you do. And then you can watch your goddamn machines cut it all down!